Mia Hayes knew she had to keep moving. The air was crisp as she pushed through the rugged forest trail, each step calculated and rhythmic. Years of military training kept her body in top form, her mind sharp. She needed this time alone, away from everything to clear her head. But the peace didn't last. From the corner of her eye, Mia saw movement in the trees. She didn't break her stride, but couldn't ignore the feeling creeping over her. Someone was watching. Her senses heightened and she slowed her pace. Ahead, an SUV was parked at an odd angle, the door hanging open. Mia's instincts kicked in. It wasn't right. She kept her movements deliberate and quiet. There was no sign of anyone near the vehicle, but her gut told her to stay alert. Then, footsteps. Heavy, quick. A man lunged at her from behind, but Mia sidestepped, using his momentum against him. 2 more men emerged, blocking her path. Another approached the SUV. There were 8 of them, ragged, dirty clothing, makeshift weapons. These men were desperate. The leader, a tall man with slick-back hair, stepped forward and grinned. "No need to run. You're just what we need." Mia's muscles tensed. She didn't know who they were, but they were no match for her. She'd been in worse situations before. "You're making a mistake," she said, keeping her voice steady. The leader smirked, clearly not impressed by her confidence. "You're in the right place at the right time. We need you, Mia. You're a runner." Mia raised an eyebrow, the muscles in her arms coiling like springs. She knew what he meant. They needed her to bypass roadblocks and evade authorities, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. The men looked confused as they glanced at each other, uncertain. One of them, a nervous guy, mumbled, "She's not just a runner." The leader ignored him. "She'll cooperate. She has no choice." Mia held her ground. "And if I don't?" The leader didn't answer. He simply gestured for them to move forward, tightening the ropes around her wrists. Mia didn't flinch. This was far from over. The van's engine hummed steadily as they sped down the empty road. Mia sat in silence, her arms still bound, but her mind was racing. The men believed they were in control, but Mia had been trained for situations like this. She would find a way out. The leader, Vincent, sat across from her, eyeing her carefully. "We're heading towards a roadblock. You're going to help us get past it. No funny business." Mia didn't respond. She knew they were testing her, but they didn't know she had already formulated a plan. The driver, a gruff man named Rust, gripped the wheel with white knuckles. The other men in the back of the van remained tense, watching her closely. They weren't used to being this nervous. Mia remained calm. She had one advantage: surprise. They wouldn't see her escape coming.
The van slowed as they approached the roadblock. Red and blue lights blinked in the distance, and Mia's heartbeat quickened. She remained composed, her eyes flicking between the men and the officers up ahead. She could feel the tension thickening in the van. "Remember the plan," Vincent hissed, his eyes narrowing at her. "Stay quiet. Don't do anything stupid." Mia gave a barely noticeable nod. She didn't need their plan. She had her own. As the van crept closer to the checkpoint, Mia's fingers subtly shifted toward the door handle. She was ready. The moment they stopped, she would act. The van came to a halt, and the officers began scanning the vehicle. Mia's heart pounded, but she kept her face neutral. Vincent was watching the officers, his attention diverted. This was her chance. In one smooth motion, Mia yanked the door open, launching herself out of the van. The sound of shouting followed her. But Mia didn't hesitate. She sprinted across the road, weaving between the parked cars. Her instincts guided her, her feet carrying her faster than she'd ever run before. Behind her, the sound of pursuit grew louder, but Mia was already in control. She darted into a narrow alley, vanishing from sight. Mia's chest heaved as she crouched in the shadows, listening. The sound of footsteps was faint but growing closer. The men were catching up, but she had a head start. She quickly checked her phone for messages. Her backup wasn't far away. Carter's team was on their way, but Mia knew she couldn't wait for them. She had to keep moving. With a final glance at the street, Mia sprinted again, heading toward the farmhouse she knew they were using as a hideout. She couldn't let them disappear again. Mia's boots hit the dirt with a rhythmic thud as she approached the farmhouse. The building was dimly lit, with shadows stretching long across the yard. She could hear muffled voices inside, but she stayed hidden, crouched behind a pile of crates. She was close. Mia's mind raced. Vincent and his crew were inside, unaware that she had followed them. This was her moment. She had to act fast before they realized she was on their trail. Mia crept forward, her body low to the ground. She couldn't afford to make a sound. The front door was just ahead, and she could hear the men talking inside. She peered around the corner of the farmhouse, her gaze scanning the area. Two of the men were near the door, discussing their next move. Mia's body tensed. This was it. She moved quickly, darting across the open space toward the door, but then she heard it. A rustle behind her. Mia spun around just in time to see Vincent and another man, Grady, emerging from the shadows. They were too close now, but Mia wasn't about to back down. She squared off with him, preparing for the fight. "You're not getting away," she said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Vincent sneered, a twisted grin forming on his face. "You're out of your league, Hayes." Mia didn't hesitate. She was ready. She moved first, closing the distance between them in an instant. Vincent barely had time to react as Mia knocked the gun from his hand and shoved him back. He stumbled, but Mia didn't stop. Grady lunged at her, but she sidestepped him, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. Grady grunted in pain as Mia forced him to the ground, but she wasn't done. She turned back to Vincent, who was struggling to regain his balance. "You should have stayed in prison," Mia said, her voice ice. She moved quickly, landing a punch to Vincent's jaw that sent him stumbling back once again. He was weak, disoriented. She had him right where she wanted him. Mia stood over Vincent, who was now struggling to get to his feet, his eyes wide with disbelief. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected her. But Mia wasn't just some target to be controlled. She pressed her boot to his chest, keeping him down, his breathing ragged. Grady was still writhing on the ground beside her, but she wasn't paying him any attention. Her focus was entirely on Vincent. "You thought I'd just cooperate?" Mia asked coldly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You messed with the wrong person." Grady struggled to rise, but Mia shifted her weight and pushed him back down with a swift kick, making sure he stayed put. Vincent's face twisted with fury. "You think you've won? You're just one person. They'll be back. You can't stop this." Mia didn't flinch. "You should have stayed in prison. At least there you'd still be breathing." Just as Vincent glared at her with a mix of anger and fear, the sound of approaching sirens echoed down the road. Mia's pulse quickened, but she kept her calm. Carter's team was close, and now she just had to hold them until they got there. Vincent's confidence was slipping fast. He could see that Mia wasn't backing down, and he was running out of options. The anger in his eyes intensified as he glanced around, realizing the situation was out of his control. "You think you've won?" Grady spat from the ground, his voice hoarse. "This isn't over. You're just a pawn." Mia shook her head, not allowing herself to be distracted. She knew exactly what he meant. It was never truly over, but this time it would be. She had them cornered. Mia's eyes scanned the area, mentally preparing herself for what was to come. She had the fugitives subdued, but their backup wasn't far off. She could feel the urgency in the air. She wasn't going to let them escape again. As the sirens grew louder, Mia moved, pulling Vincent and Grady to their feet. She kept them at arm's length, making sure neither could make a move. "Move, both of you," she ordered, her voice sharp. They stumbled, their legs unsteady under the pressure, but Mia wasn't about to let her guard down just yet. She kept her eyes on them, never letting them out of her sight. Carter arrived on the scene with his team, their vehicle screeching to a halt just in front of the farmhouse. The tactical team quickly surrounded the area, securing it, and agents rushed to take the prisoners into custody. Carter approached Mia, his gaze steady. "You okay?" Mia gave him a quick nod, her breath steady. "Yeah, just making sure they don't run again." He looked at the two prisoners, his face serious. "You've done a hell of a job, Mia." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she watched as officers cuffed Vincent and Grady. Her heart was still racing, but she knew the job wasn't over yet. There were always more criminals out there. As the fugitives were taken into the back of a squad car, Mia stood a few feet away, her arms crossed. The scene around her was now quiet. The tension that had filled the air only moments ago had dissipated, but Mia felt a familiar restlessness stirring inside her. She'd done her job, but that didn't mean she could relax, not yet. She had a feeling that this was only one part of a much larger operation. Carter stood beside her, watching the officers clear the area. "You okay?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Mia didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the squad car, where Vincent and Grady were being loaded into the back. "I'm fine, but I'm not done yet." Mia turned back to Carter, her mind already spinning with the possibilities. "You saw how desperate they were. They're not just running from the law. They're part of something bigger." Carter raised an eyebrow. "You think so?" Mia nodded. "I know so. There's something off about all this. They were coordinated, organized." The officer who had been speaking to Carter earlier stepped up, giving them a quick update. We've got their vehicle impounded, but we're going to need a full investigation. They weren't alone. Mia's instincts flared. I knew it. Carter exchanged a look with Mia before nodding. We need to dig deeper. You think they have a contact, someone on the outside? Mia exhaled slowly. That's the only explanation. No one breaks out like that without someone on the inside. She glanced back at the farmhouse where the team was now searching for any clues the fugitives may have left behind. It was all coming together now. This wasn't over. There were bigger players involved, and Mia was going to find them. Mia made her way toward the team, already planning her next move. They had the fugitives in custody, but there was still too much unanswered. She'd done her job, but now it was time for the investigation to begin, and she'd be there every step of the way, making sure nothing was overlooked. As she looked around the farmhouse, a new sense of determination settled in. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The dust was settling at the farmhouse, but Mia's mind was still in motion. She had been through countless operations, but this one felt different. The urgency in the air wasn't fading, and neither was the feeling that there was something much bigger going on. She stood with her arms crossed, staring at the wrecked farmhouse, its broken windows and scattered debris giving a clear sign that the fugitives had been desperate. The team was already collecting evidence, but Mia wasn't satisfied. Something was missing. Carter approached, his face unreadable. You're still thinking about it, aren't you? Mia nodded, her eyes still scanning the scene. There's something we're missing. They wouldn't have been this messy if they didn't have backup. Carter crossed his arms. So, you're saying someone on the inside helped them escape? Mia's gaze sharpened. Exactly. They wouldn't have gotten this far without inside help or a larger operation. I want to know who they're working with. They both stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle in. Mia wasn't going to let these fugitives disappear behind bars, not without digging into who they really were. I'm going to check their backgrounds, Carter said, his tone determined, see if anyone's connected. But you're right, we need to find their connections before they vanish. Mia gave a tight nod. We need to find their network. They're more than just a group of criminals. This is organized. As the team continued to work, Mia stepped away, pulling out her phone and scanning through files she had on Vincent and the others. She had the names and the faces, but she needed something more concrete, something that would tie them to the bigger picture. Hours passed. Mia's phone buzzed with updates, but none of them gave her the answer she was looking for. She knew there was something more to the fugitive group, and she wasn't going to let it go until she had all the pieces. She sat in her truck, parked just outside the farmhouse, staring at the files again. Each fugitive's file was thick with details, previous convictions, prison records, and random connections, but nothing stood out. No big connections to organized crime or any significant pattern. Her eyes narrowed as she flipped through one of the older reports on Vincent. There it was, a name, a familiar name. It was a contact who had helped Vincent before, during his earlier run-ins with the law. Mia's pulse quickened. This name was tied to several unsolved robberies, all with similar MOS. The pieces were coming together. She grabbed her phone and dialed Carter. We've got a lead. Vincent's been working with someone who has connections to major heists. We need to look into it. Carter's voice crackled through the line. I'll get the team to follow up on it. We'll dig into this contact. But Mia, be careful. This could be bigger than we think. She didn't hesitate. I'm not backing down now. I'll follow the trail wherever it leads. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than ever, and Mia was right in the middle of it. Mia wasn't accustomed to playing things safe, and she wasn't about to start now. The trail had led her to a series of unsolved robberies, each linked back to Vincent's mysterious contact. But those were only surface connections. She could sense there was something deeper at play. As the sun set, Mia found herself driving towards a small town just outside the city where one of the key robbery locations had been. She didn't have much to go on, but she knew one thing for sure. There was more to this story than a few desperate criminals on the run. She parked her truck near an old warehouse, its windows boarded up and its entrance guarded by a rusty chain-link fence. It didn't look like much, but Mia had a hunch that it was more than a storage facility. She had to get inside. Her mind was racing with possibilities. Could this warehouse be the center of the operation? Was this where Vincent's contact was hiding? Mia couldn't be sure yet, but she wasn't about to wait around for answers. Her heart pounded as she approached the fence, carefully moving to avoid detection. The night was quiet, the only sound being the soft crunch of her boots against the gravel path. She'd been in sticky situations before, but this one felt different. She reached the back of the warehouse, taking a deep breath before slipping inside through a gap in the fence. The night had only just begun. The warehouse was silent, too silent. The air felt thick with something Mia couldn't quite place, but she had no intention of leaving until she uncovered what was hidden inside. As she carefully moved through the dark, her footsteps barely making a sound, she noticed the faintest crack of light coming from under the door at the far end. It was as if someone had left a light on, or perhaps it was a sign of something more. Her pulse quickened. The warehouse looked abandoned, but Mia trusted no one. There was always something lurking, something waiting to be discovered. She moved slowly toward the door, her hand hovering over her weapon just in case. She wasn't taking any chances. The door creaked slightly as Mia inched closer. She could hear muffled voices from inside. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. She needed to get closer. With each step, she was more certain that whatever was on the other side of that door, it wasn't going to be easy to confront. The voices grew clearer, but she couldn't make out the words. She edged toward the window next to the door, carefully peeking inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Two men, dressed in black tactical gear, were speaking to someone. A familiar figure stood in the middle of the room. It was Vincent. Her heart skipped a beat. What was he doing here? And who were these people? Mia didn't have time to question it. She quickly withdrew from the window, backing away from the door. Her mind raced. She needed to report this back to Carter, but something told her she was already too deep into this. Mia's phone buzzed urgently in her pocket, but she didn't dare take it out. She could feel the walls closing in on her. If she made a noise now, she would be caught. But she couldn't stay hidden forever. The voices inside the warehouse were growing louder, and she had to act fast. Taking one last glance at the door, Mia slipped into the shadows. She moved quickly and quietly, backtracking toward the entrance. But just as she was about to turn the corner, a loud crash echoed from within the warehouse. The door behind her burst open. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She had no choice but to run. Her footsteps pounded against the cold ground as she sprinted toward her truck, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Behind her, she could hear the rush of boots on the gravel, the unmistakable sound of pursuit. She cursed under her breath. She had to make it back to Carter, back to the team. She needed backup, and she needed it now. As she reached her truck, she fumbled for the keys, her hands shaking with the fear of being caught. With a shaky breath, she started the engine, the sound of her truck roaring to life. She tore out of the driveway, heart racing, but she could still hear them, the men chasing her, pushing her further into a deadly game that had just begun. Mia's heart thudded against her chest as she tore through the narrow streets, the headlights of her truck barely cutting through the darkness. The warehouse had been a dead end. She had nothing to show for it except a couple of men who were now on her tail. They were too close, too fast. She could see their headlights in her rearview mirror closing in like shadows. Mia knew she was being hunted, and if she didn't act quickly, she was going to be caught. Her eyes flicked between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. They weren't just chasing her, they were closing in. Mia had one option: lose them or confront them. There was no middle ground. She slammed her foot on the gas, pushing the truck faster. The tires screeched, the vehicle fishtailing slightly as she took a sharp corner. She had to shake them off. She couldn't let them get close. The sound of the pursuing truck grew louder. They were still gaining on her. Mia's mind raced as she thought about her next move. She had been trained for situations like this, but even the best plans could go wrong in an instant. She needed help, and fast. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't have time to check it. Instead, she took another sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a street light as she cut through an alleyway. But the pursuing vehicle wasn't backing off. She cursed under her breath. She had to lose them now, or this was over. Mia's hands were gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could see the road ahead, but it wasn't the road that concerned her. It was the truck behind her that was getting closer by the second. She was driving fast, but they were relentless. The headlights in her rearview mirror grew brighter. They were too close. She needed to outsmart them. Ahead, she saw an intersection. A thought flickered in her mind. If she could make the turn at the right moment, she could shake them off. But the risk was high. She glanced at the side streets. Nothing looked promising. She was running out of options. The truck behind her was right on her tail, and she could feel the tension building with every passing second. The intersection loomed closer. Mia didn't hesitate. She slammed her foot on the brake and jerked the wheel to the left, turning sharply into a narrow side street. For a split second, she thought she might have lost them, but when she glanced in her rearview mirror, the truck was still there, right behind her. She swore loudly, her pulse pounding in her ears. Mia's truck swerved as she cut across another corner, her eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. She was starting to panic. No matter what she did, they were still there, closing in on her. If she didn't lose them soon, she would have nowhere to run. But just as she was about to make another turn, a loud horn blared from behind her. She glanced back in the mirror and saw a flash of headlights, but this time it wasn't her pursuers. A black sedan zoomed past her, blocking the truck's path. Mia's heart skipped a beat as the truck screeched to a halt behind the sedan, allowing her to gain a precious few seconds. Mia's mind raced. Who had just helped her? She quickly glanced at the sedan as it sped off down a side street. She had no time to follow it, but she knew she had to get to Carter. Whoever that had been, they just saved her life. And with one final look in the rearview mirror, Mia pressed the accelerator. She wasn't looking back anymore. Her mission wasn't over yet. Mia's truck finally skidded to a halt outside her safe house, her body still buzzing with the adrenaline of the chase. Her breath came in sharp gasps, but she couldn't afford to rest. She had to warn Carter. She had to tell him what she'd just discovered. Her phone buzzed in her pocket again. She snatched it up, heart pounding as she saw the message. "We know you're close. You're not safe. There's no place to run." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. They were watching her. The message was brief, but the implications were clear. They were onto her. Whoever they were watching. Her mind raced as she scanned the surroundings, eyes darting from one shadow to the next. Was it one of Vincent's men? Or was this someone else entirely pulling the strings from the shadows? Either way, Mia knew she wasn't safe. Not anymore. She shoved the phone into her pocket, feeling the cold sweat on the back of her neck. The safe house was no longer safe. There was no place left to hide. She had to move, get out of here before they figured out where she was. But where would she go? Mia ran to the back door of the house and locked it behind her. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard. She had to contact Carter, but even that felt risky now. Who could she trust? With a final glance at the empty street outside, Mia grabbed her gear. No more waiting. It was time to find answers. The air was thick with tension as Mia stepped outside, her senses alert. Her truck was parked in the driveway, but it was no longer a safe place to be. She had to get out of there. The safe house wasn't just compromise, it was now a trap. She turned on her heel and moved quickly down the street, hoping to blend in with the night. The city was quiet, the usual bustle of late-night traffic almost non-existent. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the adrenaline was beginning to wear thin. She needed answers, and fast. As Mia moved toward a nearby alley, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Someone was following her. Slowly, she turned her head just enough to catch a glimpse of a figure moving in the shadows. She picked up her pace, but the figure mirrored her movements. Whoever this was, they were good. Mia's pulse raced as she quickened her steps, but the person behind her remained a constant presence, never slowing down. It was unnerving. They were tracking her, and Mia could feel the weight of their stare. Her instincts kicked in. She wasn't about to let anyone get the upper hand. Mia ducked into a narrow alley and immediately pressed her back against the wall. She held her breath, trying to make herself invisible in the shadows. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then a soft cough echoed from the other side of the alley. Mia's hand instinctively went to her weapon, but before she could react, a low voice broke the silence. "You know, I really don't want to hurt you." Mia's eyes narrowed. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. The figure stepped forward, revealing themselves to be a man in his late 30s. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something about his presence that felt calculated, controlled. He wasn't a stranger, he was an ally. The man stopped a few feet away from Mia, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I know this doesn't make sense, but you're in deep and I'm here to help." Mia's eyes flicked between the stranger and her surroundings. The alley was dimly lit and there was no immediate escape route, but something about the man's tone made her pause. There was no aggression, no threat. "Who are you?" Mia asked, her voice calm but wary. "My name's Ethan," the man replied, lowering his hands. "I've been tracking you for a while. You're up against something bigger than you think. Vincent, he's just a pawn." Mia's mind spun as the words sank in. "What are you talking about? Who are you really working for?" Ethan smiled faintly, almost as if he expected the question. "I'm working for the same thing you are, the truth. And right now, that means stopping whatever it is that Vincent's trying to do." Mia narrowed her eyes. "And why should I trust you?" "Because," Ethan said, his voice low, "I'm your best shot at getting out of this alive." Mia didn't respond right away. She had no choice but to listen. She couldn't do this alone anymore. But who exactly was Ethan, and why was he so interested in helping her? The alley was quiet, the world outside continuing on as if nothing had changed. But for Mia, everything had changed. She'd been so focused on Vincent and his crew that she hadn't considered that someone else might be pulling the strings. Ethan, sensing her hesitation, stepped closer, his voice soft but urgent. "You're in danger, but we can fix this. I have a way to track their operations. We can get ahead of them before they make their move." Mia considered this. She didn't have a choice. Her options were limited. Trusting Ethan was risky, but it was the only lead she had. "I'm listening," Mia said, still cautious but willing to entertain the idea. Ethan nodded and pulled out a small device from his jacket. "This will give us access to Vincent's network. We can monitor their communications, find out where they're planning their next move, and get you the upper hand." Mia's mind raced. "And you can guarantee this works?" Ethan didn't flinch. "I can't guarantee anything, but this is the best shot we've got." Mia took a deep breath, her mind already running through the possibilities. It wasn't ideal, but it was a chance. She had to take it. "Let's do it." Mia stood close to Ethan as he worked quickly, his fingers moving over the small device. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was a full-blown war, and she was smack in the middle of it. As Ethan tapped the device, Mia kept an eye on the alley, alert for any signs of movement. She could feel the tension in the air, a sense of foreboding that refused to leave her. After a moment, Ethan spoke again, his voice low. "I've got it. I'm in." Mia's heart raced as she stepped closer, peering at the device. The screen flickered to life, showing a list of encrypted messages. Ethan was pulling up the communications from Vincent's network. "This is it," Ethan said, his fingers flying over the screen. "I'm tracking them. We'll know where they are in the next 10 minutes. Mia took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. This was her chance to make a move. She could feel it, but as the seconds ticked by, she had to wonder. How much longer could they stay ahead of Vincent and his people? The device beeped softly in Ethan's hand, sending a jolt through Mia's body. They had barely taken a moment to breathe when the soft hum of the device turned into a series of rapid pulses. Ethan's eyes widened for a split second before he regained his composure, his fingers dancing across the screen. "Something's wrong," Ethan muttered under his breath, his voice low but tense. Mia's heart skipped a beat as the pulsing grew faster, the flickering screen revealing a string of numbers she couldn't decipher. Every passing second felt like a lifetime. She instinctively reached for her weapon, her fingers curling around the grip. "What's going on?" Mia asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Ethan's face remained focused, but his brow furrowed. "I'm not sure. I've never seen this before. They've noticed us. Someone's trying to trace the signal." Mia's pulse quickened. The moment of relief she had felt earlier, thinking they were one step ahead, was slipping away. The hunt had begun again. But this time, they weren't just being pursued. They were being watched. "How long do we have?" Mia asked, trying to keep the fear from creeping into her voice. Ethan's fingers worked frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. "Not long. We're exposed. If we don't move..." A loud crack echoed down the alley, the unmistakable sound of a twig snapping. Both of them froze. Ethan's eyes darted toward the sound, and Mia turned just in time to see a figure slip into the shadows. They weren't alone anymore. "Get down," Ethan hissed, pulling Mia toward the ground as he turned off the device. His hand was on her arm, gripping her firmly. The alley had become a trap, and Mia felt the walls closing in once again. The darkness around them seemed to grow thicker as they crouched, barely daring to breathe. Mia's eyes strained in the blackness, trying to make out any movement in the night. The faintest rustle of fabric, the shuffle of feet, gave away the fact that they were being hunted, and they were running out of places to hide. Ethan held a hand up, signaling for Mia to stay still. His face was pale, a sheen of sweat covering his forehead. This wasn't just about being found. They had been tracked here on purpose. Someone knew exactly where they were. Mia clenched her jaw, frustration bubbling up. They had no backup, no allies in sight, and yet the presence of their pursuer felt too calculated, too precise. This wasn't random. Whoever was after them had resources, connections. Then, out of the stillness, a voice cut through the air like a knife. Come out, wherever you are." It was taunting, the words dripping with confidence. Mia's blood ran cold. The voice was familiar, too familiar. Vincent. Mia's hand gripped her gun tighter. She could feel the weight of the situation settling in her chest. They'd walked right into his hands, and now there was no turning back. Ethan's whisper broke the silence. They've got us. They're not going to leave without a fight. Mia's instincts flared. She had to move. Now! Now! Without hesitation, Mia surged forward, pushing Ethan toward the nearest cover. The footsteps behind them were growing closer, the sound of boots crunching on gravel making her blood run cold. The trap was closing in. Mia's mind raced as she sprinted toward the corner, the narrow alley twisting before her. They couldn't keep running forever. The thought of being cornered like rats in a cage was too much to bear. She glanced back at Ethan, who was keeping pace behind her, his face set with grim determination. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. Left, Mia whispered urgently. They had no choice but to turn down another alley. They rounded the corner, but the sound of running feet followed them, relentless. The manhunt was on. Mia's eyes darted ahead, scanning the shadows for any sign of escape. They were coming closer, too close. "Stay low," Ethan muttered. But Mia wasn't sure if it would matter. As they reached the end of the alley, the street before them was empty. No cars, no people, just the oppressive silence of the night. The streetlights cast long shadows, making the whole world feel like it was closing in on them. But just as they slowed to a halt, a sharp noise cut through the air, the screeching of tires. A car had pulled up at the far end of the street, blocking their only escape route. Mia's heart stopped. They were trapped. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, a voice called out from the darkness, sharp and cold. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Mia froze, eyes narrowing as the figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Vincent, and this time he had his men with him. Vincent's grin spread across his face like a predator cornering its prey. He stepped closer, his boots making a soft thud against the pavement. "I was wondering when you'd show up, Mia." Mia's grip tightened on her gun, her entire body tense with the knowledge that there was nowhere left to run. The walls had closed in, and this time it wasn't a game. They were trapped. "Give it up," Vincent continued, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. "You're out of moves, Mia. I've got eyes everywhere." Mia's mind raced, searching for any possible way out. Her breathing slowed, focusing only on the situation at hand. This wasn't over, not yet. There had to be something she could do. But before she could think, Vincent stepped closer, his voice cold. "I have to admit, you've been a challenge, but now it's time to end this." Mia took a steadying breath, her eyes flicking to Ethan. He was already a step ahead of her, his hand on his own weapon. The tension in the air was palpable. "I didn't come this far to give up now," Mia said, her voice steady despite the rising fear. Vincent chuckled, his eyes cold and calculating. "Then let's see how far you're willing to go." Mia didn't hesitate. She lunged toward Ethan, the world around her narrowing to a single point: survival. The sound of gunfire rang out in the cold night. Mia's heart skipped as she heard the unmistakable pop of a shot fired. But it wasn't her that had been hit. Ethan's body jerked violently to the side as a bullet grazed his shoulder. He fell to the ground, groaning in pain, but his eyes never lost focus. "Get down," Mia shouted, diving to the side, pulling Ethan behind cover. Her heart raced, the adrenaline surging through her veins. She couldn't let him go. Not now, not like this. But the men were closing in. Vincent was directing them, his voice sharp as he ordered the others to flank. The trap was tighter now, and Mia could feel the walls pressing in on her. Mia's blood ran cold as she heard Ethan's labored breaths, each one shallow and ragged. The bullet had missed a vital organ, but that didn't matter. She could still feel the weight of the situation pressing in from all sides. Every movement now was a calculated risk. The sound of Vincent's voice, cold, taunting, and all too familiar, cut through the air. "You think you can win this, Mia? You're already out of options." Mia's hands trembled, but she forced them steady as she gripped her gun. Her mind raced, calculating, processing every possible move, but it was clear Vincent had them in a corner, and Ethan, despite his efforts, was down. Vulnerable, she glanced down at him. His face was pale, sweat dripping from his brow, his breathing shallow. "Stay down," Mia whispered, trying to steady her own breath. Ethan's eyes met hers, a silent acknowledgement of the danger they were both in. She didn't have to say it. He knew she was preparing for what was coming next. She couldn't leave him here, not like this. The air around them felt electric, humming with tension. As Vincent's men closed in, there was no escape, no way out. Mia's thoughts raced faster and faster, her pulse pounding in her ears. She could hear footsteps, sharp and deliberate, coming from both sides of the alley. They were surrounding them. A sudden movement, and Mia's body reacted before her brain could process it. She ducked, narrowly avoiding a bullet that whizzed past her ear. Her heart skipped a beat, the sting of the near miss shocking her into full awareness. "Move!" Mia shouted at Ethan, grabbing him by the arm, yanking him to his feet. He winced but didn't protest. They had no time for weakness. Vincent's voice echoed in the alley again, louder now, mocking. "It's over, Mia. You can't run forever." But Mia wasn't running, not yet. Her eyes darted from one side of the alley to the other. She knew it was now or never. The air felt thick with inevitability. There was no escape, no plan B. She had to fight her way out. The sound of footsteps grew louder. Mia turned to face the oncoming storm, gun raised, her chest heaving with the effort to steady her aim. Every nerve in her body screamed, but she held it together. There was no room for hesitation. The first man came into view. Mia didn't flinch. She fired. The shot rang out, deafening in the narrow space. The man dropped, his body hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. But there was no time to celebrate. She could hear more footsteps, more guns. "Don't just stand there, Mia." Vincent's voice sliced through the air, venom dripping with every word. "You're only prolonging the inevitable." Every muscle in her body tensed, but Mia didn't back down. She had no choice but to keep fighting. They couldn't die here, not like this. She wasn't going to let them win. She looked at Ethan one last time. His eyes were wide, his breath ragged, but there was a flicker of something in them. Determination. They weren't done yet, not while they still had breath in their lungs. And then, as the footsteps drew closer, Mia took one more deep breath, ready to do whatever it took to survive. The alley had become a battleground. The distant sound of sirens mixed with the chaos around them, but Mia couldn't afford to focus on that now. There was no time to worry about who was coming or when reinforcements would arrive. The only thing that mattered was getting through this moment. Vincent's men closed in, their shadows growing longer with each passing second. Mia's body was on autopilot, her mind running a mile a minute. She had to keep moving. But Ethan? She couldn't leave him. He was injured, barely able to stand, and yet there was no hesitation in his eyes. He was still with her, still fighting. Mia's breath was quick, too quick. The adrenaline surged through her, and for a moment she thought she might suffocate under the weight of it all. There was so much at stake, so much more than her own survival. They had to win. They had to. A shot rang out. Mia barely registered the sound, but she felt the heat of the bullet pass dangerously close to her cheek. She dove for cover, pulling Ethan with her, the ground scraping painfully against her skin. The next few moments felt like an eternity. There was no time to think, only to react. Her gun was raised, her eyes locked onto Vincent's men as they advanced. One shot, two shots, and then the silence. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Mia's heart skipped. Was it over? But then, boom, another shot fired, followed by a sharp cry. Ethan, his hand shot out, grabbing her arm in a vice-like grip, pulling her to her feet. They had to get out. Mia didn't wait another second. She couldn't. There was no more time for hesitation. The battle wasn't over, not yet. She turned to face Vincent, who stood just a few feet away, his gun trained on them. His smirk was cold, calculated, and then just as the world seemed to freeze around them, Mia knew this was the moment that would decide everything. The air was thick with tension, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in Mia's ears. Vincent stood before her, his smirk only growing wider, like a predator cornering its prey. But Mia wasn't done, not yet. "Don't think for a second this is over," Mia growled, raising her gun, her eyes locked on Vincent. The adrenaline coursed through her veins like wildfire, every muscle in her body coiled and ready to strike. Vincent chuckled, that cold, mocking laugh that made her blood boil. "You really think you can win, Mia? You're out of options. My men are everywhere. You're already dead." But Mia didn't flinch. She knew what he was doing, trying to break her, trying to make her doubt herself. It wasn't going to work. She was done running. It was time to take the fight to him. With a sudden movement, Mia dove forward, taking cover behind a dumpster just as another shot rang out. The bullet whizzed past her, missing by inches. The world seemed to move in slow motion. The only thing real in that moment, the relentless pounding of her heart. "Ethan!" she yelled, her voice sharp, her eyes darting to see if he was still alive. He had barely managed to pull himself into cover, but he was still conscious, still with her. "I'm good," Ethan called back, his voice strained but strong. "Just get us out of here." The alleyway was filled with the sound of gunfire and the crackle of radios, but Mia's focus never wavered. Vincent's men were everywhere, but she couldn't afford to let them corner her. She had to keep moving. She had to finish this. Mia's heart raced as she moved, ducking from cover to cover, her eyes scanning the street for any sign of an opening. The night was alive with danger, but she was no longer afraid. The fear had been replaced with sheer determination. She wasn't going to let Vincent win, not today. Her eyes met Ethan's as he nodded toward her, signaling that he was ready to move. Mia didn't hesitate. She sprinted, her body moving with precision as she took out two of Vincent's men in rapid succession. They crumpled to the ground, leaving only the heavy silence of the night. But it wasn't over. Vincent was still out there, and Mia wasn't going to let him slip away. "Where you going, Mia?" Vincent's voice echoed down the alley. He was closer now, far too close. "You can't hide forever." Mia's fingers tightened on her gun. "I'm not hiding, Vincent. I'm ending this." Without another word, Mia and Ethan sprinted toward Vincent's last known position, ready to end this game once and for all. Mia and Ethan cornered Vincent near the edge of the alley, the tension in the air so thick it was suffocating. Vincent was standing, unmoving, his gun held loosely at his side, a smug grin still plastered across his face. "You really think you're going to stop me?" Vincent sneered. "It's too late. The plan is already in motion. You'll never stop it. I'm always one step ahead." Mia stepped forward, her gun trained on him. "You've been one step ahead, Vincent, but not anymore." Vincent's eyes narrowed, his grin faltering for the first time. He was on the defensive now. "You've lost," Mia said, her voice steady and final. "You're done." Without waiting for a response, Mia fired. The shot was precise, a warning shot that sent Vincent stumbling back, his hands raised in surrender. He wasn't dead, but his reign was over. "I'm done," he muttered, the fight draining from him. "But you'll never know who's pulling the strings." Mia's heart pounded, but she couldn't let his words distract her. They had won. The war was over, and as Vincent's men scattered, she knew it was time to end this chapter once and for all. The silence that followed was deafening. Mia lowered her weapon, her hands shaking slightly from the intensity of it all. Ethan was beside her, bloodied but alive. They had made it. They had survived. The sirens wailed in the distance, the sound of backup arriving, but Mia wasn't thinking about that now. She was thinking about the next step, the long road ahead. There would be paperwork, investigations, and questions to answer, but for now she allowed herself a single moment of relief. She turned to Ethan, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "We did it." Ethan smiled back, the exhaustion in his eyes giving way to something else. Hope. "Yeah, we did." But they both knew that this wasn't over, not really. As long as there were criminals like Vincent out there, there would always be more work to do. But for tonight, they had won. And that was enough. The city lights twinkled ahead as Mia and Ethan walked side by side, the sounds of the chaos from earlier, now distant echoes. The air was cool, the danger finally behind them. They had made it. They had survived. Mia glanced at Ethan, her partner in this madness. "You think we can finally take a break?" she asked, her voice light but filled with a genuine hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Ethan chuckled softly, a tired but genuine sound. "I think we've earned it." Mia nodded. She had fought hard. She had faced impossible odds, but she knew the fight was never truly over. But tonight was a victory. They had made it through, and that was enough. But even as Mia tried to enjoy the victory, the familiar buzz of her phone interrupted her thoughts. She picked it up, the message that appeared on her screen making her pause. "Carter, great work, but we need you. There's always more to do." Mia let out a breath. She wasn't surprised, but for now she allowed herself a moment of peace. As she looked at Ethan, she smiled. "I guess the work never ends." Ethan smiled back. "It's what we signed up for, isn't it?" Mia knew this would never truly end. She could feel the weight of the next challenge just beyond the horizon. But as she looked at Ethan, her partner, and the bond they had formed through this chaos, she knew she wasn't alone. The war against crime would continue, but Mia was ready for whatever came next. And as the city's lights flickered ahead, Mia finally felt a sense of peace. For now, they had won. Mia and Ethan made their way back to headquarters. The streets felt different now, quiet, like the calm after a storm. The work was far from over, but they had made it through the worst of it. The door to headquarters opened, and Mia felt a rush of relief. They had completed their mission, but she could already feel the next challenge on the horizon. "Ready for round two?" Ethan asked, his voice teasing, yet full of confidence. Mia smiled, "Always." As Mia stepped into the building, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. They had survived. Against all odds, they had made it through the chaos, the danger, and the unknown. It wasn't easy, but they had won, and now, as she walked into the heart of the operation, she knew one thing for sure. They were stronger than ever. The sun began to rise over the city, its first rays casting a golden light on the horizon. Mia stood at the edge of the rooftop looking out at the world she had just fought to protect. She had won, and so had the city. She turned to Ethan, a genuine smile on her face. "We made it," she said. Ethan nodded. "Together." And as the city came alive around them, Mia knew one thing for sure. The battle was never truly over. But with allies like Ethan, she was ready to face whatever came next. If you've made it this far, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like, and drop a comment in the section below. Let us know where you're watching from and tell us what you'd love to see next. Stay tuned for more action and suspense.